All right, so I've done Simeon last week, and I did state that I would do Denmark, and I'm going to do Denmark today. And Denmark is pretty interesting, and this may be maybe a 35, 45-minute study on this. There's a lot of stuff I had to research and then probably condense it and put it all in a concise format. So just be patient with me. I may be jumping here, there, everywhere. Okay, so be patient with me. What I'm going to do first is we're going to go to the scriptures here and see what Moses and also what Jacob or Yaakov or Israel said about Denmark in these end times. So Genesis chapter 49, starting in verse 1, states here, and Yaakov called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together that I may tell you which will befall you in the last days. In Hebrew, that's the Charit Hayamim, or the days before the coming of the Messiah, which began in the first century. So from the first century on, God is telling us we should be able to figure out, if we do our research, and remember this, Proverbs 25, verse 2, it states, it is the glory of Yodevahi to conceal a thing, which is very interesting, but the honor of kings to search it out. So a lot of times in prophecy, you have to search things out to fully understand it. And as I've explained before, it's very vital for us to understand who the tribes are, or have at least a guesstimation, estimation of where they migrated, because if you don't understand that, then you won't fully understand biblical prophecy, because a lot of the prophecy in the Bible involves Israel. And then we're going to do another series of studies identifying China, Russia, and you're going to be shocked about Russia. And these other nations that are in the Bible, because it's good to have a good geopolitical. If you want to understand prophecy, it's good to study geopolitics. What is geopolitics? Is understanding where nations are located around the world and what the conflicts are, because God stated that there would be worldwide conflicts in these end times. So it makes sense, if you want to be a student of future history or past history or current history, is to study history. And the Bible is linked with history. And so we have to be history students as well as biblical students as well. But I will help you with that, because I'm a history student myself. And I'm in the process of creating a prophecy chart. And it'll be a little more detailed than the one that I currently use right now. So just be praying I can get it done as soon as I can. So anyway, in Proverbs 25, verse 2 says, it is the glory of Yodevahi to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings, and that's what we're trying to become, right? Kings and priests, right? Is to search out a matter. All right, so let's go back to this. So we know that those who search it out, and God gives you the ability, you should be able to identify, or at least have a good estimation, a guesstimation of where they're located today. All right, so, and that's what we've been doing. So we're going to go to Dan here. All right, so Genesis 49, verse 16. Dan shall judge his people. All right, so when we think of Dan, let's think of Dan as an entity or group of people with the characteristics of wanting to judge the people. As one of the tribes of Israel, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse heel, so that his rider shall fall backward. I have waited for thy Yeshua, or salvation, O Lord. Okay, so that's interesting what he says there about Dan. Israel. All right, so let's see what Moses says about Dan. Deuteronomy chapter 33. Verse 22, and of Dan he said, Dan is the lion's whelp, he shall leap from Bashan. Okay, and so Dan also has something to do with a lion, as you'll see, and he shall leap from Bashan. So we'll go in a little more detail about those things. And so I have Hebrew Roots. I subscribe to Hebrew Roots, this magazine. This is the January-April 2019 edition. I'm just going to read this to you, so you got to listen to me here. And he states here on page 22 of the magazine, one of the most fascinating of the lost tribes is the tribe of Dan. They were like a vanguard tribe, paving the way for others to follow. So I quote you that verse in Genesis 49, verse 16 to 17. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heel, so that his rider shall fall backward. The tribe of Dan is fairly easy to spot because they left a trail like a serpent, placing their father's name in many different parts or places as they migrated through Europe. Thus we find the nation of Denmark, which means Dan's mark, okay? That's where we get Denmark from, Dan's mark, as one of their dwelling places today. The Irish also claim to be descendants of Dan, citing a legend about Tuath Danann, or Danann, the tribe of Dan, coming to their shores as early as 721 BCE. A lot of people laugh about this, but I don't think it's funny because it's true. It is believed that Jeremiah the prophet came to Ireland with the daughters of the king of Yehuda, or Judah, where they established the European royal dynasty by intermarrying with other royal descendants of Judah who were already there. It is interesting to note that the Irish claim the grave of Jeremiah is in their land. Let me underscore that. The Irish claim the grave of Jeremiah is in their land. And so Dan possessed two areas in the Promised Land. Their original land grant was given to them by Joshua and was on the sea coast near Joppa. However, a group of Danites moved to the north and inland because they were unable to conquer all the territory granted to them in the south. And so let me quote a scripture here. It's in Judges. So Judges chapter 18. Judges chapter 18, verses 28 to 29. And there was no deliverer because it was far from Zidon, and they had no business with any man, and it was in a valley that lieth by Rahab, and they built a city and dwelt therein. And they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan, their father, who was born into Israel, howbeit the name of the city was Lash at the first. So there the tribe of Dan set up idols for worship and chose non-Levitical men to be priests, even during the time when God's wilderness tabernacle was in Shiloh. And so this is in Judges chapter 30 now. Chapter 18, verse 30. Now, interesting, judging. Dan. So already we've seen the linkage, and I don't know if you guys realize it now, but Samson was of the tribe of Dan. Okay? Samson was of the tribe of Dan. And so this is interesting. So, and the children of Dan set up the graven image in Jonathan, the son of Gershon, the son of Manasseh. So Manasseh had something to do also. When we know Manasseh is the United States today, right? So I'm just trying to put all the pieces together. We're searching it out, right? Because we're learning how to be kings and priests, right? So let's continue on. This is a very good story here about Dan. It kind of helps also prove who the tribes are today in these end times. So Dan is a key as well, as you're going to find out. And so the son of Manasseh, we know Manasseh is the United States today. And he, or the major bulk of them, and he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan. So let's understand, America is connected to Denmark, and Denmark is connected to America until the day of the captivity of the land. Now, one of the symbols of Dan is what? Let's go back. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 49. Got to do some digging, folks. And if you don't want to do any digging, you're not going to figure any of this stuff out. All right, so a serpent has something to do with Dan, right? And you know that Manasseh, let's go back. So Genesis 49 verse 7, Dan shall be a serpent. All right, so let's go back to Judges again. I'm going to put all the pieces together here. In verse 30, and the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan and to this day. Now, why am I focusing so much on Manasseh or America being associated with Denmark? Well, because we have, amazingly, a flag. It's called the Gadsden flag. It's a historical American flag with a yellow field depicting a timber rattlesnake. All right? So this flag is named after the American general politician Christopher Gadsden, who decided in 1775 during the American, or should I say Manasseh Revolution. It was used by the Continental Marines as an early model flag. Okay, and so it's called Don't Tread on Me. All right, and I had this from Yara Davidi's excellent book, The Tribes, one of the greatest books ever written. In my opinion, page 194, it says, U.S. Don't Tread on Me flag, first flown aboard one of the first ships in the United States Navy, the Alfred, on January 4, 1776, making it the oldest recorded flag in the United States. So the oldest recorded flag in the United States is this flag, Don't Tread on Me. Okay, and notice that it has a serpent there. All right. And I just read the scripture that Manasseh is connected to Denmark, all right, or Dan. And so the U.S. Don't Tread on Me flag, first flown aboard one of the first ships in the United States Navy, the Alfred, on January 4, 1776, making it the oldest recorded flag of the United States. It is called the Gadsden flag after the designer, Colonel Christopher Gadsden, who presented it to the U.S. Navy, the new U.S. Navy, Esker Hopkins, or the Commodore of the new U.S. Navy, Esek Hopkins, E-S-E-K. It's E-S-E-K Hopkins. Thus, the flag is also called the Hopkins flag. So this is interesting, folks. So it's going to get more interesting too. So I just wanted to show that to you. So let's get back to the Bible here. So let's get back to this. So I hope you guys see the connection there. All right, so because of their first location on the sea, Dan became one of the chief seafaring tribes, often connected with the pagan seafaring Phoenicians, okay? Phoenicians, rather. The seafaring Phoenicians. That's P-H-O-E-N-I-C-I-A-N-S, Phoenicians. The Song of Deborah depicts Dan as living in ships. And so let's go to Judges. Again, Judges, Dan. Okay, there's a connection there, okay? So I just wanted to point that out to you over and over and over and over again. All right, so let's get back to Judges chapter 5. Judges chapter 5, verse 17. Gilead abode about Jordan, and why did Dan remain in ships? So we know that Dan is connected to ships. And because of their first location on the sea, Dan became one of the chief seafaring tribes, often connected with the pagan seafaring Phoenicians, okay? All right, so the tribe of Dan became a wandering tribe very early on. They were able to travel extensively in their ships, giving meaning to Moses' prophecy about leaping from Bashan. So let's go back to that. Deuteronomy chapter 33. Verse 22. Excuse the dogs going out of their minds barking. And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp. He shall leap from Bashan. And so, again, the tribe of Dan became a wandering tribe very early on. They were able to travel extensively in their ships, giving meaning to Moses' prophecy about leaping from Bashan. And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp. He shall leap from Bashan. And so in the past, the tribe of Dan has also been connected with the nation of Greece and with the Mediterranean island known today as Cyprus, which is once called the Isle of Dan. So Cyprus was originally called the Isle of Dan. The Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, also was populated early on by Danites. These wandering Danites became known as the part of the Celtic people. They always had a problem with idol and sun worship, which we're going to talk about more, taking those practices with them wherever they went. And so after the Iberian captivity, the northern portion of Dan migrated into the area of the Black and Caspian Seas, along with many of the other lost tribes. From there, they moved on into Europe, leaving a serpent's trail. For example, before the lost tribes arrived on the shores of the Black Sea, many of Europe's rivers had different names. However, today, those same rivers are known as Danube, Dniester, as D-E-N-E-S-T-E-R, D-E-N-E-P-R, and then Don. Collins says, this is Steve Collins. He's another person that's a student of the tribes. Collier's encyclopedia states the names of the rivers now are Scythian. These Danites would have migrated into Europe with the Scythians in later centuries. The Danites left their name wherever they went, revealing their trail throughout history, just like the tail path of a sidewinder snake in the desert today. This is from Israel's Tribes Today, the book Israel Tribes Today by Steve Collins on page 216 and 217. So Yaakov said, or Israel, said that Dan would be like a viper which bites the horse's heels. Collins believes this refers to the long guerrilla war which Ireland fought with the British until they finally won their freedom. So he says here, the Danites are pictured as being under the heels of a horse, but they succeed in throwing off the rider by biting the heels of his horse. The Irish were governed under the heels of the British, the rider, until the early 1920s. So that's in the same book, Israel's Tribes Today, on pages 217. So that is interesting insight. We're going to get into more about Dan here. Is this clear to everybody so far? I just want to make sure that this is making sense. All right, so let me get back to, let's take a look at the Google map here. You see Denmark and you see Northern Ireland. And so this makes, this is where Dan migrated to today. All right, so let's take a look at, I wanted to show you their coat of arms. Here's the coat of arms of Denmark today. You see the lion there? See the lion? All right. And there's another, an earlier coat of arms, or what is called, that's the royal version. And then you have the lesser state version right here. You see the lion there. Okay. And so, and then of course they have royalty as well. So, I mean, God, I tell you, again, I try to explain this to people. The tribes are very important now. I mean, he talked about in Bereshit, in Genesis, and in the last book of the Bible is there. So people just don't understand how important. And, that phrase, the last days. Let me show you something here. This is something that God had revealed to me several years ago. All right, the phrase last days, which in Hebrew means the Charit Hayamim. Well, there's 7 different characteristics of the Charit Hayamim. The first characteristic of the Charit Hayamim is it has something to do with the 12 tribes of Israel. So that's the first characteristics of the Charit Hayamim is about the 12 tribes of Israel, as you can see there in Genesis 49, verse 1. All right? And so, let me simplify this so it won't be so confusing here. Let's just look at the phrase here. All right. So there we go. So we have 8 occurrences where that phrase, which in Hebrew means the Charit Hayamim, or the days before the second coming of the Messiah. Okay. And so, as you can see, the first verse indicates that it involves the 12 tribes of Israel. The second characteristic, it involves what? And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the house shall be established. So it involves the temple being reestablished in Jerusalem. Okay? So that's the second characteristic of the Charit Hayamim, or the days before the coming of the Messiah. The third characteristic is the outpouring of the Holy Spirit in the last days, which began in the 1st century. All right? But it will culminate in the second coming of Messiah. And then the fourth characteristic of the last days is perilous times, which we're living in today. The fifth characteristic is Yeshua being the intermediary between us. And this has been going on since the 1st century. He speaks through his Son now, having these last days spoken to us by his Son. That began in a mighty way in the 1st century. All right. The sixth characteristic is socioeconomic problems. James 5 verse 3, your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. You have heaped treasure together for the last days. And so that is indicating that there's going to come a time when you have a rich nation, but yet people are being oppressed. And the last characteristic of the Charit Hayamim is people doubting that he's going to come, that the Messiah is going to come the second time. All right. And so that's another, I just wanted to point that out about the last days. I think I'll probably do a separate video study, and we're going to study each of those characteristics in a little more detail. But I just wanted to reveal that to you. All right. So anyway, back to Dan here. Now this is a very good article by Peter Salimi. He says the tribe of Dan, he's correct, Denmark, and the Irish. He makes some pretty good points here, and like I said, I'm going to use stuff that if I am not going to repeat stuff that's already been taught correctly. I mean, that's a waste of my time to do so. So he states here, the patriarch Dan was born from the handmaid of Rachel. The handmaid of Rachel, Bilhah. Rachel was an envy of her sister Leah. She wanted so badly to bear a child for Jacob that she gave him, let me see, I guess you guys can see this, yeah, 150. She wanted so badly to bear a child for Jacob that she gave him for a handmaid to bear a son. The son was Dan. When he was born, she said, God have judged me and has also heard my voice and has given me a son. Therefore, calls she his name Dan. This is the meaning of the word Dan. It means judge. In Jacob's prophecy for the latter days, Dan was prophesied to judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Here's an interesting characteristic of Dan. The pulpit commentary says, with a play upon his name, the firstborn son of Rachel's handmaid Bilhah is described as one who should occupy an important place and exercise highly beneficial functions in the future commonwealth. Remember, commonwealth. Enjoying independence and self-government as one of the tribes of Israel, and performing the office of an administrator among the people, not of his own tribe merely, but also of all Israel. Dan was to be a judge in the other tribes of Israel, yet still be his own separate nation. All right? And so that's interesting. And so let's go over this here. I wanted to point out something. And this is interesting, the mighty Hercules. Okay. The legend of Hercules has been told from ancient times to our day to day. So where do we get all this from this legend of Hercules? Many have not made the connection between Hercules and Samson. So let me underscore that two more times. Many have not made the connection between Hercules and Samson. Many have not made the connection between Hercules and Samson. Yet the similarities between the two are obvious. Samson was a judge in Israel, was of the tribe of Dan. Again, Samson was a judge in Israel, was of the tribe of Dan. The Danites, when traveling to Greece and having still commerce and trade with Tyre, were of the tribe of Asher, still communicating with the Danites of the Promised Land, knew and heard about Samson, their judge, and all his exploits. Coming back to Greece, the stories of Samson were told. Interestingly enough, the Encyclopedia of the Classical World states the tales of his heroic deeds lend to the supposition that Hercules was originally an historic figure. Of course, that is Samson. So both Hercules and Samson were incredibly strong. Both killed a lion with their bare hands. Both were virtually invincible. One important event in Hercules' life involved his escaping from the clutches of a symbolic woman who was called Pleasure. This corresponds directly to the troubles Samson got himself in with the harlots of Canaan. And so anyway, I just wanted to point that out, the connection between Hercules and Dan. And so let me continue on here. And then the seal Josephus, you can find this in Josephus if you want to look at this. But the seal Josephus mentions is revealing because the tribal emblem inside, see Numbers 2 verse 2, of the people of Dan included the image of a snake. We already went over that. The Jewish Encyclopedia, page 405, the symbolism is derived from what Jacob had foretold. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder, a viper in the path. Thus, the emblem traditionally associated with Dan is an adder biting horse's heels. Okay? And so, let's continue on here. And this is what I want to get to. Why is Dan not included in the book of Revelation? Okay? because people have asked that question, so I'm going to answer it here the best I can. All right, so the 144,000 of the tribes of Israel that will stand on Mount Zion when Messiah, when he comes, does not include Dan. Why? Some blame it on an ancient scribal error in copying an original document sometime in the far distant past, and this error was copied from then until the present. Others say Dan received their inheritance before all the other tribes, therefore not listed. These explanations do not satisfy. Revelation 7 verse 4 says that all the tribes of the children of Israel are listed as the 144,000. So why does it say Manasseh instead of Dan? The solution is simple. Well, it's simple when you know. Dan is split into two nations, Ireland and Denmark. Ireland is Catholic, which certainly helps you to understand how idolatrous Dan is, because the Catholics are full of idolatry, right? Ireland is Catholic. 80% of the Danes are Lutheran. Okay? Ireland is Catholic. 80% of the Danes are Lutheran or Protestant. So today, the tribe of Dan, as Ireland, is still given into idolatry found in tradition of the ancestors. They are, as a nation, an integral part of the false mystery system that God labeled as mystery. It was not a mystery to me, or it should be a mystery to you. Mystery, Babylon the Great, in Revelation 17, verse 5. This is a great false church. So there's a religious aspect of it, and that's the false church. There's a geopolitical, which is, there's your financial part, which is New York City and the United States. And also there's a geographical part, which is the geographical area in Iraq, which the United States has built the largest military base ever in the history of military bases. Most people don't know that, in the area of Iraq. So anyway, this is a great false church, a worldly church, which has persecuted Yodavi's true service down throughout the ages. I think somebody made a comment, yes. Well, you're going to get the answer to it, wife, today. All right. So notice in Revelation 2, verse 20, in addition to women acting like Jezebel in the end times, also people that follow Jezebel tend to be idolatrous. This same false church is likened to what that wicked woman Jezebel, which called herself a prophet, is to teach and seduce by service to commit fornication. And that's not talking about literal fornication, also spiritual, and to eat things sacrificed unto idols. So whoever are people that really get into the teachings of Jezebel, they really tend to get into idol worship a lot. So God says he will smite her children with death because they have known the depths of Satan. Jezebel's children, then, are those who have been taught at an early age her abominable idolatries and filthiness and are deep in her doctrine. This woman Jezebel symbolizes the Roman Catholic Church and other churches that follow her. And I would say, add to that, the other churches that are Sunday worshipers as well. So that's an important thing. All right, so most Danites are members of this false church from birth, attending her schools, festivals, and idolatrous religious worship services. This is the same false church God commands his people to come out of, so they will not receive her plagues. He's going to bring on those who worship her. Revelation 18, verse 4, since the nation of Ireland, the modern Danites, are in the depths of Satan and do not know God's true way, probably nothing less than the complete destruction of this false Roman church, combined with the presence and power of Messiah's rule on this earth, will finally bring them to repentance. And so Dan says to Yodevahi in Genesis 49, verse 16, I have waited for thy salvation. So why is Dan waiting? Because they don't have the right knowledge to understand what Yeshua, the true Yeshua, is, which that's what salvation means. And so anyway, it is Denmark that would be part of the 144,000. How can we know? The clue is in the name Manasseh. Back in Judges, the 18th chapter, and I just quoted this to you, the inland Danites who moved to Denmark were then migrated to Laish and named it Dan after their father. So let's go over this again. Afterward, the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. That's in verse 30. So the Septuagint, which is the first translation from the Hebrew text into another language, it was Koine Greek, all right? This was done back in the 250 BC, around that time. The Septuagint has Manasseh just like the book of Revelation. God is telling us that it is Denmark and not Ireland that will have 12,000 that will rule with Messiah on Mount Zion. The Irish will have to go through the plagues. Watch the Catholic Church be destroyed, and Yeshua himself to help them come out of idolatry that they have been steeped into for centuries. So the way to understand why Denmark is not there, because Denmark is linked with Manasseh. And that has been proved in Judges chapter 18. When you read that, let's go to that again. Judges chapter 18. Judges chapter 18. And the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. So the Manassites are linked with the Danites. So that should be the answer to that. Okay? So is that clear to everyone? At least I hope so. All right. So when we get to that, Revelation chapter 7. Now remember, the tribe of Joseph consists of two tribes too, Manasseh and Ephraim too. So we got to understand that. And he talked about Manasseh here. So he mentions Yehuda, Asher, Nethilim, or Naphtali, Manasseh, which reverts back to Denmark. Okay? And so that's the only way that we can possibly, logically understand that. All right? Because it says all the tribes of Israel, and God can't lie. Okay? So that should help you to understand that. And so I think that's it with, let me go over the tribal characteristics. Here's the official Israeli stamp of Denmark, and again, you see the judge thing, you see the balances there. All right. Dan was the fifth son. His mother was Belial, and maidservant of Rachel. The precious stones of the breastplate are listed in Exodus chapters 20 and 29. Each stone represented the tribe. There are differences of opinion concerning which order the stones were listed, whether by birth mothers and all that. The fifth stone is called the Shin in Hebrew, and we identify this as the stone of Dan, since the Midrash Rabbah does. Okay. The Shem is the fifth stone, and Dan was the fifth son in the order of birth. The Shem was also the name of the city the Danites conquered and renamed Dan after their forefathers. Some say the Shem was an opal, but others suggest have been made, and for the time being, we have adopted the opinion that it was of Jacinth, of orange-type color. So I think I have covered Dan here. So, the Danites today, let's take a look. The map is located in Northern Ireland and then over here Denmark. Okay, so that's where they are today. So that is it with Dan, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to talk about another tribe next week. And let me stop the recording here. Okay, let me repeat it again, Sheree. All right. First of all, we got to understand something. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of Israel. So obviously all the tribes are listed here. And so I explained that Manasseh is linked with Denmark. And the scripture that I used to prove that is Judges. Judges, chapter 18. Let's take a look at this here. Verse 30. And the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom. Here, let me highlight this. Maybe this will be easier for you to understand if I highlight this. Right here. Okay, and so right there you see, and the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, see Manasseh there, all right? He and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan. So Manasseh was connected to Dan, and I showed in the, if you were, I don't know if you were present when I showed this, but I showed you one of the first flag that was connected to America was a flag of a serpent, which also proves that America or Manasseh was connected to Dan in some capacity. And it also proves that Americans are connected to idol worship, which what does the Bible say about all of Israel? Really, they have a problem. Ephraim is attached to idols, right? So anyway, I just wanted to make that connection. All right, and so the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity. So to get from this, using the Bible interpretation, Manasseh and Denmark are connected to each other. So when we go back to Revelation chapter 7, that explains this mystery of the reason why Denmark, because it says all the tribes are listed. So right here, of the tribe of Manasseh were sealed 12,000. Okay? And so that's really the only logical way of understanding the reason why Denmark is not listed there. For whatever reason, God inspired John to put Manasseh, and Bible students would understand that Manasseh was connected to Denmark. And then also Peter has another, in my opinion, a plausible explanation of this when he states here, it is Denmark that will be a part of the 140. Okay, let's go over this again. It says, since the nation of Ireland, the modern Danites are in the depths of Satan and do not know God's true way, probably nothing less than the complete destruction of this false Roman church, combined with the presence and power of Messiah's rule on this earth, will finally bring them to repentance. Dan says to God, I have waited for thy salvation, which means they don't have the salvation. Okay, so it's in Genesis 49, verse 16. And so it is Denmark that will be a part of the 144,000. How can we know? The clue is in the name Manasseh. Back in Judges, the 18th chapter, the inland Danites who moved to Denmark, when they migrated to Laish and named it Dan after their father, after the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, I read this to you before, I'll read it again, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests of the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. So God is telling us that it is Denmark and not Ireland that will have 12,000 that will rule with Messiah on Mount Sinai. The Irish will have to go through the plagues and all that. And so that is the explanation. I know there's other explanations, but that's the explanation that I understand the reason why Denmark is not listed there in the book of Revelation. Okay? So is that clear to you, wife, now? Okay, I guess it is. All right. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. Okay. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.